Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics, our review of all the week's political news live on KMTV. With me, Louise Britton, standing in for Paul Francis. Now on this programme, we'll be talking about the latest on Operation Stack, with plans from one lorry park in Ashford to double its size in an attempt to solve the county's lorry problems, as well as talking about a campaign to save Maidstone's high-speed service to London. I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by my guest, University of Kent student Rob Byrne. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Louisa.
Thanks so much. Now, first this evening, bosses at the Ashford Truckstops say new plans to double the size of their facilities could stop Operation Stack. 300 more spaces will be made to reduce the amount of lorries in laybys and estates. The £150 million site may also see 400 homes built in the Orbital Park, and Harry Pete has this report.
This site in Ashford could answer the prayers of residents who are angry with lorries parking illegally in the town, or at least that's what the bosses think. Darren Smith is the manager of the Ashford Truckstop, where, if plans go ahead, could double in size from 300 parking spots to more than 600.
It certainly would. It certainly help the situation. You know, at the end of the day, we sort of sit on and can turn away sort of 80 odd lorries, so you know there could be an extra 150, 200 spaces which would help that situation out.
So it could be the solution to illegal parking in Ashford and also help out those lorries who face fines and clamping. But if a Kent-wide long-term solution isn't found, could they not just be back to square one in a few years' time?
Certainly a possibility. I think, you know, they situated a few little truck stops all around Kent, not just sort of on the M20. That would sort of help alleviate the problem, you know, fully.
So while the long-term future of lorry drivers here in Kent does still seem to be up for debate, what is certain though is the confidence of those behind the project here in Ashford that they will get the planning permission so that the £150 million plans can go ahead. And as you can see, they've even already started digging up the site and getting it ready for the new homes and the expanded truck stop.
Creating 750 jobs for the local area. We also have a resale park which has already been determined over at Finbury, but the relocation is due to the demand from the occupiers. They feel Waterbrook is more suited for this area. That's about 25,000 square foot there. We also have on the hybrid application an allocation for 400 units. This is obviously to increase the housing demand that Ashford has.
The site will be a huge 140 acres, but what will be done to make up for the loss of green space?
We also have a linear park that will obviously separate the truck stop and the commercial side to the residential. It's about 13 acres in total, and we also have another 25-acre site for ecology. So we're making sure that, you know, being a 140-acre site, not all of it is taken up by mass buildings and houses. It's obviously trying to keep the natural heritage as well.
The proposals still need to be given the green light for planning permission though, but with the truck stop turning away more than 500 lorries a week at the moment, if it does go ahead, it may help to ease the pressure. Harry Pete for KMTV in Ashford.
So Rob, Operation Stack's been a long-standing issue in the county, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's been used more than, I think it's 74 times since the process came into operation. And I think that the approach that Maidstone Airport has come along with, where there's £6 million being spent on that potentially being used, when residents all around know that it's not strictly fit for purpose to take that on, really. I think the gentleman in the report actually had the best solution about this. More truck stops actually all dotted around the M20, you know, and actually outside of it, because 500 trucks going through, you know, being stopped and, you know, a lot of them being clamped as well, that's a serious disruption to business. And potentially with what we've got going on with, you know, Brexit and potential customs problems, I don't necessarily think it will be, you know, the disaster people think it is, because a lot of these customs checks are actually done online now prior to the lorries coming through at the points. So it is a problem, yes.
I suppose it's difficult for towns as well. So we saw Stanford, there was going to be a lorry park built there that was going to be absolutely massive, several times the size of Disneyland. Obviously that fell through. It's tricky for towns to have a lorry park that size be built next to them, isn't it?
And also, yeah, the quality of life issue is one thing, but also the bureaucracy and the planning permission is incredibly hard to get right. And there are so many places where they can dot it around the M20, but, you know, I think there is a risk of going for the easiest place with Maidstone, well, what looks like the easiest place with Maidstone, but what they really need to do is this, which is a step in the right direction, but equally we need to look to other places too where we can take some of this congestion away.
And you mentioned Brexit, obviously that's been playing on everyone's minds lately. And moving on to more national headlines, Theresa May's today coming under increased pressure to set out where she stands on Britain's future trade agreements. The PM has said Britain would not face a choice between a free trade deal with the EU after Brexit and striking deals with the rest of the world. It comes as she has faced criticism from Eurosceptic Tory MPs that she could be heading for a Brexit in name only. And full negotiations on the UK's 2019 exit are due to resume on Monday. So obviously Theresa May's in quite a tricky situation at the moment, isn't she?
Oh, yeah, it's not a job I'd want. It's not a job that anyone in the Conservative Party should want either. You know, I think it's really important to reiterate that she is actually, you know, stable in her position. I'm not going to fall into the trap of using that overused statement. But she, you know, the public do, a large minority of the public do back her, and the majority of the Conservative Party, you know, the grassroots membership do as well, because most people realise that this isn't really a job that anyone else can just walk into at this point.
So do you think that, because some people are saying that she isn't a stable leader at the moment, that she could be someone that some people don't necessarily back, do you think that she's the person to lead the negotiations forward until we exit the EU fully?
Yes, I do. I think she's the best out of the bunch that they've got. I can't think of a single name that would actually surpass the experience she has within European negotiations. And when you look at how the Conservative Party elects its leaders, particularly when it's in government, it's always someone who's occupied the office of Home, Foreign Secretary, or the Chancellor of the Exchequer itself, one of the great offices of state. So I really don't see how anyone else can occupy this.
She's in a tricky situation in terms of what she can and cannot say to the public, I suppose, in terms of trying to negotiate with the EU and holding her cards close to her chest. Do you think that's a reasonable thing to say, or do you think she should be more open about what her negotiation strategy is?
The thing is, it's so hard to be, well, it's not hard to be open about it, but it's hard to be succinct about it, because what we need to prosper after Brexit is access to the single market and enough time to basically create this bespoke deal that they're really looking for. It's not the Canada deal strictly, because that focuses much more on goods rather than on services. And because we have a primarily service-based economy, a Canada-style deal is not going to cater to us in the way that we need it to. So essentially, what we need is one that has access to the single market, but one where we don't actually retain membership of the customs union. Customs unions make sense when you're looking for political integration. And, you know, you have it in Israel and Palestine. They are in a customs union with each other where they put a common external tariff on products outside, and they forbid each other in the customs unions to sign trade deals from around the world. So we need to be open and outward looking, but equally we need to recognise that Article 50 is a deterrent in itself, in that it only gives you 2 years to create what really you need about 10 years to actually do.
And moving on to something that's also been taking Westminster by storm, about Kent's MPs are among those who have voted to leave the Palace of Westminster while the proposed multi-billion-pound refurbishment of the historic building takes place. The move is part of a proposed £5 billion modernisation and won't take effect until at least 2025. Several MPs argued Parliament's could become a safety risk and urgent action was needed. But how important is heritage for the country during a time of financial difficulty? We asked shoppers in Rochester.
Heritage to me is everything. I think that if we're going to stay in the European Union, then what are we spending all that money on Westminster for, when I personally don't think we need two lots of people dictating to us what we're going to do?
I think it's very important because it brings in billions and billions of money from the tourists, and so I think it's worth spending the money on renovating Westminster.
If they've neglected it for a long time, as governments often tend to do because they go in for short-termism, I'm afraid they've now got to pay the price of vastly increased expenditure.
I'm not surprised at the bill. It's an enormous, complex, an awful lot of work to do. Whether they need to be there is another matter.
I don't think it's that important, to be fair. I mean, if financial difficulty has people struggling at home, you know, to feed themselves, and we're renovating a building, I don't think it's that important.
We've just spent several billion on a couple of aircraft carriers. Do we really need those? I'd sooner have the Palace of Westminster any day.
So should government be spending so much money on renovating the House of Commons?
Well, it's one of our most prized institutions. I'm sure it's worth spending the money on. You know, it's slowly sinking into the Thames, isn't it, anyway? So you need to... It's a much-needed thing. I think it should have been done much earlier than it currently is. And we're not even looking to do this until about 2025. There is a risk in this whole process, though, that those who don't like the institution itself and argue that Parliament should permanently move to another location, I think we need to exercise caution in that too.
And in terms of, some people might say that this money would be better invested in, say, the NHS. Do you see where they're coming from?
I see where they're coming from, and I would absolutely advocate more money being spent on the NHS, but different departments have different budgets, and you'd need to find the shortfall from that. And equally, we have to recognise that if we don't do something about this now, fire risks, asbestos, and just generally that, we need to recognise that we're going to have to spend a lot more money on this later if we don't sort something out now. It's
a tricky situation. Thanks for that, Rob. And coming up after the break, we'll be talking about plans from train providers to cut high-speed services from Maidstone West. And we'll be talking about the latest developments when it comes to the consultation regarding building a quarry near Ryarsh. And do you think 16-year-olds should get the vote? We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to Paul on Politics with guest Mary Mckinlay from Ryarsh Parish Council and Maidstone Lib Dem Councillor James Willis. Now, a campaign's been launched against plans to scrap one of Maidstone's West high-speed train services to London St Pancras. The Kent Messengers involved in the petition, which has more than 1,000 signatures to save the trains. Services in the area will be under a new rail franchise from December, and a document said bidders were given the option of running services to Abbeywood rather than St Pancras International. Well, James is here to talk a little bit about this. You're part of the campaign group. How's it going so far?
Really well. And again, I'll say the same thing. Thanks to the Messenger, taking it really seriously. Issues in Maidstone and Snodland, where we're facing these potential cuts to rail services. Local people, commuters are getting pretty angry because at the moment we don't know in Maidstone, if you're going to move to Maidstone, you're a resident, you don't know if you're buying a house in Maidstone, if you're a business in Maidstone. At the moment we've got trains that are slower than steam days. It's rubbish. At the moment you don't know. We've been promised faster trains with better connections. At the moment we don't know when they're happening, because there's been a delay and there's confusion with that. And secondly, the high-speed services are under threat. They're not promised in a new franchise. It's shocking, frankly.
And in terms of people who've responded to the campaign, you've been flyering today. What's the response from people who might have potentially moved to Maidstone to get the high-speed?
Well, I'll also look at the work the Messenger's done as well in Maidstone. Frankly, if you look at... when I was out with one of your reporters when we were doing some Vox Pops, when you look at what people are saying, they're angry because if you're going to buy a house somewhere and you think it's got under an hour, which is about a fair under an hour connection to London, people buy into that. And do you know what? We'll pay a bit more. We'll happily move to Maidstone. And we want people to move to the houses that are being built. We want local people, families, and we want money for we want businesses to come in to create jobs. Therefore, it's better for the economy, more local tax, etc. And if people don't actually get that, and they're actually being promised something and it's delayed or whatever, it creates massive uncertainty. Therefore, businesses can't get employees, people can't sell houses, we don't get the tax infrastructure to pay for the infrastructure for everyone else.
And Mary, in terms of your parish council, they're quite close to Maidstone. Do people rely heavily on trains to commute to work in your area?
Well, we do, but we've been let down a few times recently because we lost our direct service to Cannon Street. That went. Our nearest station is Westmorland. If we want to use the high-speed link, then we can go to Snodland.
Which is a new developed station.
Which is newly developed. It doesn't have that many services.
Yeah, it's 3 services a day, and they're all under threat at the moment.
That's
which
right.
is what the Messenger's working really hard to...
And there's an issue there about parking.
Yeah.
So I have to admit that generally, if I'm going up to London and I want to go to the north of London, then I'd probably just as likely travel to Ebbsfleet and park my car there.
If they take the services away, you'll definitely be doing that, won't you? That's the issue.
This is very
we want to
true.
encourage people. We want more services. We want an hourly service and the facilities at the railway stations. Money's been spent on the Snodden station, you mentioned, and we're planning. The reason why we're so upset about it in Maidstone, the council, both councils together, and the MPs have been lobbying for money to be spent on Maidstone East to make it a better station, and also development around the edge of it, which may benefit Maidstone taxpayers because the profit made will go back to Maidstone taxpayers. And at the moment, what do we do? Because the whole thing's up in the air. We need the franchise bidders and the government to actually understand how important Maidstone's a county town of Kent. Westmorland has got Kings Hill near it, a really busy area, lots of extra houses. We're doing what we're told by the government at the moment, but we're not getting the support in infrastructure. So please, a message to the Rail Minister, please actually support the areas that we're helping develop.
So unfortunately, that's all we've got time for on that subject. But next this evening, the Welsh Government wants to follow Scotland in lowering the voting age to 16, so young people can vote in their 2022 council elections. Now, the Electoral Reform Society are calling on Westminster to do the same here in England. According to research conducted during the Scottish referendum, 16 and 17-year-olds have higher turnout rates than those of 18 to 35-year-olds. But should the voting age be lowered? We spoke to shoppers in Medway about it.
I think it's a bit too young, isn't it? Yeah, I think when you're 18, maybe it's better. You're much more sort of mature and, you probably have your own opinions better.
No, I don't necessarily think it's true. I think 18 is more appropriate age. I think I know people younger are getting a little bit more learned now, but I still think 18 is probably the right age.
I don't think so. I think it needs to be at least 18. Because they're not mature enough minds yet, I don't think. That's personal feeling myself anyway.
After the Brexit vote, I know my kids are 12 and 15 and they both wanted to vote, but obviously they weren't eligible to vote. So, I mean, they wouldn't have been even if it went to 16, but yeah, I agree, I think it should be lowered to 16.
And why do you think that is?
Because my parents can still vote, and my parents are in their 70s, and a lot of what they vote for is never going to benefit in their lifetime, but all of the things that want to be voted on, my kids would benefit from. So I think it's probably better to have the younger vote than it is the older vote who aren't going to be around to see what they're voting for.
16? Not really.
What's that?
Too young. And nappies, aren't they?
So Mary, first of all, do you think people as young as 16 should be allowed to vote?
I think that it leaves us with a big problem of education, because I find that sadly an awful lot of young people haven't got the faintest idea of the responsibilities of government, especially local government. And so I'm not sure that they understand what they're voting for. So I think there's a case for developing citizenship as a topic in education. But if they can be made enthusiastic about it, that's got to be good.
James, do you think that's the case?
I totally agree with your last statement. It's about enthusiasm, and as you said, under 17 and 16-year-olds are more likely to vote than 18 or 19. So something's happening there, and it would help that. If you start voting, you continue voting. Yeah. So if education can be improved, you mentioned citizenship, basically not to bore kids with it, but just to get them to understand what voting is about and why it's important that people vote. There's a very low turnout in local council elections. It's great because the Welsh Assembly have just are putting together plans, which I think will get voted through for 2022 for young people to start voting. I think if they pay tax, you can vote, but there is a responsibility of education. It's going to take a couple of years to make sure it's brought into the national curriculum a bit better.
We'll have to wait and see. Now, moving on, and the medical group which put the High Street surgery up for sale in Westmorland have said the service for their patients won't be affected this year. Tonbridge and Morling MP Tom Tugendhat said this would be a big relief to everyone in the town after fears the surgery had been bought last week. He said he'd had received information by the Westmorland Group practice, which takes care of almost 20,000 patients. There'll be no change to any services this year. It comes after residents and councillors expressed their anger last month at the news the surgery would be closing. So, Mary, do you think this is a relief for people in the area?
Well, it is. I mean, I'm a patient of Westmorland Group practice and have been involved with them for a very long time. It was a concern if it was going to be closed down. But I know that the practice themselves are trying very hard to make sure that they're taking on facilities to provide the service to people. So I think the confirmation that's been given is good. it is a worry. I mean, we have a fairly large elderly population. It's difficult to get to the Westmorland surgery on foot, on public transport, and parking is very expensive. So people are quite keen to have the surgery left there so that they can get there.
But the surgery in itself, people have said that it's in not a very good state and it's not really fit for purpose in the modern times.
Well, it's not got all the bells and whistles that you might imagine. And the front end of it, it's a house, it's an old house, and it needs quite a lot of repairs done to it. But it's not that long ago that the back of the surgery, they increased the facilities and they improved it. But it does need more. It's got too many people, it has too many patients, and it does need better facilities. And it also needs some parking.
I'm sure we'll be following that story as well. Thank you. Now, staying with the district of Tonbridge and Malling, one of the other issues affecting residents are proposals to build a huge quarry on the outskirts of Ryarsh. More than 300 people attended a meeting in Ryarsh earlier this week to hear about proposals for a massive quarry that's set to be assigned to the area. Members from Kent County Council presented to residents the scheme, many of whom fear the proposals could ruin the village. If plans go ahead, the quarry will be in place for 30 years, mining 3.6 million tonnes of sand. So, Mary, you were at the meeting earlier this week. How much of an issue is it for residents?
It's a huge issue and people are very concerned. The fact that we had actually 310 plus people turning up to the village hall for a meeting. We had no seats left, it was standing room only. Shows just what a big issue it is. There's a concern about the environmental issues, there's a concern about pollution, there's a concern about the traffic, and overall concern about sustainability. The important thing though now is that we're not facing the immediate threat. This is a consultation process.
James, is this something you're hearing from residents in Maidstone potentially about a knock-on effect?
We have a big quarry in Maidstone. Different to this, but I do know how much people care, and it affects the countryside. We do need these stones to make things, build things. It's totally understandable, but I think what I would say, if you note there, 310 people at a public meeting. That's it's not a massive. That's a big turnout. That suggests people need to listen. I heard Kent debating this policy-wise a few months ago, and I think there's lots of work to be done to make this something that's acceptable to people at all, if at all.
There's a lot of issues to look at. Sustainability is one, the damage that it's going to do to the environment, but the individuals, the people of Ryarsh and the neighbouring villages have a lot of work to do now, because it's up to us to write individually.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Big topic there. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. That's all from us here at Paul on Politics. Thanks to our guest tonight for coming into the studio, and we'll be back again next week with another review of the week's political news. But for me, that's all. Good night.